Mr. Cotler, thank you for joining us. The news about you this week is pretty shocking. You know, this imminent threat to your life that was foiled. Can you walk us through what happened and what you were told?
Well, actually, the thing began over a year ago when I was traveling back to Montreal from Washington. And as we landed, the RCMP got in touch, told us not to leave the airport. And to sum it up, they then told me that they had credible evidence that I was under imminent and lethal threat. My wife and I were both advised of that at the time. They did not disclose the source of the threat. Some months later, we learned that the threat came from Iran. That wasn't a surprise to me because Iran had been escalating its own transnational, not only repression, but assassination. And then, of course, as the year proceeded, I had the benefit of excellent law enforcement protection until a little over 3 weeks ago, when I was about to attend the 60th anniversary of my McGill law class. I was advised that day that there was not only an imminent and lethal threat, but that threat was to been carried out within the next 48 hours. And so I did not, of course, I was told not to go to the reunion. And then I learned later on, or at least I read in an excellent report of Robert Fife in the Globe and Mail. I don't know where he sourced it all, but I can confirm all he said, except for one thing, where it was referenced that the suspects had been apprehended. I don't know about that, but everything else in that report of his was fully reported. And yes, I was under a direct assassination threat within 48 hours. That was as of 3 weeks ago.
Is it your impression that the threat has been diminished? I mean, do you visibly see evidence that the threat to you is lower?
Well, the diminishing is to be found in the fact that my security protection has been somewhat diminished. It's still exemplary. I still have the armored cars outside of my house. I still have constant 24/7 protection. For example, I'm undergoing dialysis now, and yesterday they even, as they always do, accompany me to my treatment, as they do to anything that I do. So the protection is still there. It's still exemplary, but it has been somewhat diminished, if I can use the characterization of it. It's gone from a 5 range to a 4 range.
This is a lot. You know, you're pretty philosophical about this, but you have always been a real fighter for justice, and I'm trying to imagine what kind of toll this takes on your psyche, especially if we go back to when you were first told about this. I'm presuming this is after October 7th, 2023. Was there a connection there to when you first came under threat?
I don't know if there was a connection. Directly, I was told about this at the beginning of November, not long after October 7th. There may have been a connection. I think the connection is more because I was then advocating very strongly for putting the IRGC on the terrorist list, which finally happened, though I've been advocating for that for some 15 years now. I think because also I was engaged with some of the major political prisoners in Iran that, like Nasrin Sotoudeh and Narj Mohammadi, also my association with Masih Alinejad, an Iranian human rights leader, the women's rights movement, who herself had been targeted. I think if you take all these things together, I think that may have been the kind of tipping point, and that moved where the transnational repression and targeting then escalated into an assassination attempt.
So that phrase that you used, transnational aggression, assassination, I gather you're scheduled to testify in Ottawa at a parliamentary hearing about precisely that. I guess the intimidation of activists in some cases here in Canada by foreign governments. How much of a problem do you think this is in this country?
I think it's a very serious concern. Actually, the testimony was supposed to have taken place today, but it got delayed because of parliamentary debates. But our Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights did testify before the foreign interference inquiry. That testimony was done on our behalf by Noah Liu, an excellent and exemplary young lawyer. And the point that we sought to make before the foreign interference inquiry is that that inquiry is in that sense somewhat more limited. It makes the point, which is important, about interference in the electoral process, but the transnational repression goes beyond that. It includes transnational misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, cyber security warfare. It includes the targeting of dissidents and journalists and human rights defenders and the like. It includes as well, what is in effect an assault on the democratic order, on our national security and national sovereignty, because that's what these transnational repressive policies and practices constitute. And when you get into the question of transnational assassination, then you're really dealing with a collective danger to our human security. And regrettably, Iran has been able to carry this out amidst a culture of impunity. We have not sufficiently held the Iranian regime accountable. At the same time, as we have to show increasing solidarity with the Iranian people, who are the ongoing targets of massive domestic repression. So you have the confluence here really by the Iranian regime of transnational repression and assassination on the one hand, and massive domestic repression on the other. And here is where we have to combat that impunity, and the community of democracies has to begin to hold the Iranian regime accountable for that transnational repression and assassination at the same time as we show solidarity on behalf of the Iranian people.
But how? What is it that Canada should be doing right now that it's not?
Well, number one, we are about to host the G7 countries. We should get the other G7 countries, because Canada and the US are the only ones that have put the RGC on the terrorist list. We have to get the other democracies to do the same. Number two, we have to make the whole question of transnational repression and assassination a priority when we next host the G7. Number three, we need to make this whole issue of transnational repression. It is so important that we need a separate department, an agency of the government to combat it, because it cannot be done within the existing framework as effectively as it must be, because of the manner in which that phenomenon has escalated. We need to set up a particular protection framework for the victims of transnational repression, particularly here in Canada, which is the Iranian diaspora, which are journalists that are targeted, which are dissidents that are targeted. So there are a host of initiatives that we can take and which the community of democracies can begin to initiate. And I'm hopeful that working collectively and in partnership, we can reverse the dynamic here and begin to hold the Iranian regime accountable and not be the ongoing targets of that mass repression, let alone assassination with impunity.
As I hear you talk, I think sometimes threats on people's lives have the effect of getting them to stop what they're doing and staying quiet. That's not what's happened to you. Are you not afraid or worried at all about continuing to press the way you do?
Well, I think the Iranian regime, part of the objective of repression and assassination is to silence the targets, to intimidate and the like. And I think if we do that, then they feel they have won. And so I think it's important that we collectively engage, and that the Iranian people have been doing that. And as we show solidarity with them, I think we hold the regime accountable and send the message that we will not be intimidated, that we will not be silenced, and that we hope that Iran itself, the Iranian regime, will begin to reconsider its own policies and realize that they should act in the best tradition of the great Iranian civilization. And that best tradition is to act on behalf of the Iranian people. And I'm hopeful that if we show solidarity with the Iranian people, then maybe the Iranian regime itself will begin to take notice, and maybe even there'll be a change in that Iranian regime.
Irwin Cotler, as always, thank you for your time and for your work.
Not at all. Good speaking with you.
You too.